I have several different I don't know, call it, they're not different renditions, or I have several different documents of history concerning R.Y. Blaylock. And the interesting thing is that I would say 9 out of 10 are all the same, and then there's a 10th that somebody has decided to interpret it differently than the other 9 did. So we're just going to read what the history is. This is going to be right out of his own personal autobiography here. As always, I will try to make it as interesting as I can, stopping along the way a little bit, maybe sharing some things or whatever. But I realize, A, to some people, history is boring. B, especially when you're just reading it, it can be really boring. So we're talking about in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s. And so if you hadn't heard, don't know, R.Y. Blaylock, Reuben Young Blaylock was his name. He came out west really to run from the Lord. He was running from being called to preach, thought he could get away from it, came out to the west, away from his family and home, West Coast, up and down Oregon, Washington, and California. And in the time that he was here, he lived about 95 years. And in the time that he was here, of course, in his ministry, he is responsible for starting many churches. A lot of these names and places you'll be very familiar with. What's also interesting is beyond the direct churches that he's responsible for starting, there are churches since then that come out of those churches. For instance, he started the church in Salinas, and we ultimately come out of the church of Salinas. Okay, so it's interesting. So he's part of our history, and really all the West Coast is, I would say a good portion of the West Coast is because of R.Y. Blaylock, okay? So that's why it's kind of important that we know a little bit about it. What I like is it's neat to be able to go back in somebody's own words. It's kind of like if you ever go back and watch an old movie, something that was actually filmed from the 70s or 80s. I remember, anybody remember this? Anybody remember that? What is it? Rockford Files, yeah. My wife hates it when I do that. Sometimes I'll get in this little thing where it gets stuck in my head. When I was a kid, I never would watch that show. What was the guy's name? Garner, right? James Garner, yeah. And that was one of those old time actors that, he had that voice and that look, and it just, something kind of neat about him, especially for me as a kid, because my mom would watch those shows and I would see them growing. Of course, I was all into the cartoons, and I had to wait for her shows to get done to watch my shows. So my mom used to watch soap operas, and we had to play outside until 3 o'clock, which is when General Hospital finally got over, and then we got to come in and watch our afternoon cartoons. Things like that. So anyway. But when you go back and you watch, I tried watching one of those the other day, Rockford Files, and they're really lame, right? The acting and stuff. But it's neat to go back and see the old cars, and they were legitimate cars on the road back then, It's neat to be able to go back and actually see that history and kind of get a sense, because it's recorded, you get a sense of what it was like. And to me, reading this is kind of neat that way, because even though I can't see it with my eyes, I can see it in my mind. I can get a sense of what it was like. And I really think it's good. It kind of opened my eyes up to the idea that in this country, it wasn't always easy like it is today. We are, today our manner of comfort is a result of people like this who worked hard. And even in our churches, we have the churches that we have, and this one included, because of the hard work of a man like this. And so you'll see what it took to live life back in those days, and realize you've got it really, really easy, so there's nothing to complain about. He says, I was born in North Carolina, so complete opposite side of the country, February 9th, 1867. Born again, 1880, so that would be 13 years old. I did the math. I was raised by Christian parents, the seventh child in a family of 14 children. You know a little something about that, don't you there, Sister Wilma? All right, that's the way I think it was a lot back in those days. Now you're lucky if people have more than one, or even one at all. My parents were of English and Scot-Irish extraction, early settlers in America. Father, being a poor man and an ordinary farmer, was unable to give any of his children a college education. So what schooling we got above the common schools of that day was acquired by ourselves after we were grown. In the spring of 1891, when I felt called to preach, I decided I would go west and get that idea out of my head, all right, running from the call to preach. I came to Walla Walla, Washington, where I had a cousin, Dr. N.G. Blaylock. I worked for him on a fruit farm just below the city. I attended the Baptist church and put my membership in the church there. See, terms like that, we're not used to hearing, put my membership in the church, all right? Put my membership in the Baptist church there. I was elected clerk and treasurer of the Sunday school. That fall, I attended school in Whitman College for a few months. Then I secured a position as an attendant in the state insane asylum at Fort Steilacoom. This is 9 miles from Tacoma, where I attended church and put my letter in the First Baptist Church. I attended it and took part in the Young People's Society. Today we would call that a youth group, okay? All right? But I like how he says he put his letter in. I put my letter in the First Baptist Church, all right? In other words, he moved his membership, all right? There was a letter exchange. And just so you know, back in these days, it wasn't irregular to find that when somebody would move, the church would grant them or give them a letter to take with them. Nowadays, you say that to certain people and they'd say that's unscriptural. Only thing is, if you look in Romans chapter 16, you'll find probably the only case of a letter exchange for a member that you ever find in the Bible with a lady named Phoebe. Phoebe, I assume that's Phoebe. And Paul is telling the church at Rome that she is coming with this letter, and when she gets there, receive her among you. So it was a letter that she was bringing with her as a recommendation to receive her into their membership, okay? And so that was done quite often back in the day. That's where some of the confusion of some of this stuff with Blaylock and the Church of Salinas really comes from, because there was a different way of doing this and a different way of wording it, and people are confused by it. So you just have to listen to it, and I'll try to bring it out when we get there. While there, I took several Baptist papers: the Pacific Baptist, published at McMinnville, Oregon; the Baptist Sentinel, published in Dayton, Washington; and the Western North Carolina Baptist, published in Asheville, North Carolina. In other words, he received these papers and would read them. All three of these papers are extinct now. I ordered D.B. Ray's Baptist History and read it. I felt all the time I should preach. After I'd worked there a year, I was entitled to 2 weeks vacation with pay. I told Brother Walker, who was the clerk of our church, that I thought of taking my vacation and attending the Puget Sound Baptist Association that was to meet in Puyallup soon. So he had me elected as a messenger from our church. I went, and the pastor of our church was elected moderator. I was put on a committee to report on religious literature. A brother preacher was chairman of the committee, and he told me to write out what I wanted to give him, and he would put it in his report. So I did, and recommended the Baptist Sentinel, but he left it off. When he read the report, a Brother Crouch wanted to know why the Sentinel was left off. The chairman said, I believe one of the committee did mention that, but I misplaced it. The moderator said it could be brought in by an amendment. Brother Crouch, a fine young preacher from Kentucky, wrote out an amendment. I seconded it. Then the fire flew. One Englishman, a pastor in Olympia, said, "It is measly, trashy, no account," and he did not want it in his house. Several warm speeches were made on both sides. I finally got the floor and told them I recommended the paper and had been reading it for some time and that when the brother says it is measly, trashy, no account, he does not want it in his house. He says the doctrine of this New Testament, holding up a New Testament, are measly, trashy, no account, and he doesn't want it in his house. A brother, W.H. Sherman, got the floor and made a kind of compromise speech. When the vote was taken, the amendment lost by a few votes. Alien immersion was not mentioned, but that was the main issue. The Baptist Sentinel had opposed alien immersion, and it was hated by the alienists. All right, anybody remember what that is? Alien immersion? All right, accepting unscriptural baptism from churches not of like faith and order, okay, of some other denominational kind. And so in this particular Baptist association, they were accepting that, or most of them were okay with it, and it was a problem. And by the way, this is still a problem in a lot of our ABA churches. In fact, one of the biggest churches I don't know if you remember a while back, it's a little unfortunate, but a while back, Brother Nixon's son-in-law came here as a missionary. He was going to be a missionary to Romania, and he came here and wanted us to help support him. And we ultimately did not, because the church that was sending him out was a church that Brother Dustin Wright had been to, and at least we had heard that they were accepting alien immersion, at least Southern Baptist baptisms and things like that. But you're going to find out, I'm hearing that most of the churches in Texas now are accepting alien immersion. That's from Brother Nixon, from Brother Dustin, from Brother Inerarity, and also from now Brother Lucas Bowler, who attends our classes, and he's in Texas. And that's one of the big problems he's having with being in Texas right now, is that they're all willing to accept alien immersion. These are ABA churches that used to not do that or be that way, but it's becoming a really common thing back there. In fact, Brother Lucas, he sits in our classes, he said he asked his pastor, and when he's ready to be ordained, he asked his pastor if they could please make sure to not have any twice married pastors sitting on his ordination council, and the pastor said, fat chance, basically. So, not going to happen. We're not going to tell him no. And so this is kind of a thing. There are a lot of these things that are just different than the way they were, but it's always been a problem. And in this case, that was the problem that he was facing. But Brother Blaylock did not believe in alien immersion and wanted to support this paper, but the vote lost by a few votes because there were enough people that did not want to make alien immersion an issue. All right? Brother Walker, a good friend who was from Georgia, talked with me and asked me if I ever felt called to preach. I confessed and denied not. He told me to go ahead and preach and said, we need real God-called men that will preach the truth out here. I'd say we kind of need some of that here today too, right? We just need some God-called men. Well, we want them to preach the truth too, but we need to start with the God-called men part to start with, and then let's do the rest from there. But man, Sister Wendy just told us a church and another that struggling and closing up because of no pastors to be found. Now Coachella's dealing with that. They are not finding anybody. They can't find anybody to call as pastor. And this is becoming a problem all over the country, by the way. After the association and my 2 weeks vacation, I went back to work, but could not rest. I could read my Bible and pray every night. One night I surrendered and said, Lord, I will do the best I can. I resigned my job and went back to North Carolina in the fall of 1893 and went to school to R.L. Patton. There you go. A great teacher and Baptist preacher in Morganton, North Carolina. I began to preach some then in schoolhouses or wherever the Lord opened an opportunity. I was licensed to preach by Bakersville Missionary Baptist Church in the spring of 1894, and I don't think that's California. I'm guessing that's going to be back somewhere in North Carolina. Chapter 2. I left Mitchell County, North Carolina in 1894 and came to Louisville, Kentucky, where I attended the Southern Baptist Seminary. I put my letter in Franklin Street Baptist Church and worked in Point Mission, a mission school, or a mission Sunday school that my brother, T.L. Blaylock, had started a few years before while he was attending the theological school. I enjoyed my work in the mission. Some souls I led to Christ. I hope to meet in glory. While in the seminary, I met some of the great preachers of the South, J. Boyce Taylor and Dr. Truett. At one time said to be the world's greatest orator, they are now gone home to glory. My teachers were John A. Brodus, who died while I was there, Dr. A.T. Robertson, Dr. C.E. Kerfoot, Dr. Sampe, and Dr. Dargan. I believe they are all gone to glory now, and definitely by now. Dr. Dargan, my homiletics teacher, had us write a sermon on missions for criticism. I wrote on Matthew 28, 19 and 20, just like I preach it today. In his criticism of my sermon, he commended my zeal, but doubted the wisdom of my criticism of the boards. I then was a direct missioner as I am today. All right, direct missioner. I think that means, I've not really heard that term, but I think that means that we were talking about that he would be sent out to go and start churches, and he had the authority to do that, sent out by the church or by a church, like you just see in the Bible. And rather than a board doing it or having to start a group of people and have it as a mission work for years and years and years and then start it, he would go and he would start mission works. He'd preach, he'd baptize, and he'd start churches. And by the way, that's the way you find it in the Bible, okay? So I couldn't really argue with it, but people do. People still do argue with that. Here I met Elder C.H. Friedenberg from Oregon. We became fast friends and have remained so to this day. I was ordained by Franklin Street Church at the close of school, Dr. J.T. Christian. I believe that's one of our big Baptist history books, if I'm remembering right, John J.T. Christensen, one of the ones that we have that we use, actually. Pastor of Broadway Baptist Church, preached my ordination sermon. Dr. H.C. Roberts was my pastor. Dr. Weaver of 22nd and Walnut Street was moderator of the council. As far as I know, all the ordination council have gone to glory. I came to Oregon the first week of 1895, and now that's what, 130 years ago? Wow. And preached my first sermon after being ordained in Wingville, Oregon, out west of Baker City on the second Sunday in June 1895. My text was Galatians 6:17, be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. I have been sowing and preaching it ever since. I went with a brother Perry from Baker City over into Eagle Valley and preached a few Sundays. Coming back to Baker, I stayed with brother E.P. Waltz, a great old Baptist preacher. While stopping with him a few weeks, I preached in a small town or two north of there. I then went over to Enterprise in Willapa County and supplied the Baptist Church of Enterprise for 3 months. Here I baptized my first candidates, 2 young men. The Presbyterians held 2 Sundays a month in the church house and the Baptists 2 Sundays. It was kind of a union church house. When I was to baptize these 2 candidates, the Presbyterian minister came to me and asked me to baptize a member for him. I told him I could not do that, for my church only ordained me to baptize for them. He said he did not know that. He thought I could baptize anyone who asked me to baptize. So, there you go. Taking a stand even back then. While here, I went down into Lost Prairie country and held a meeting in a schoolhouse assisting old brother Ed Silvers, a Baptist preacher whom I had known when a boy back in North Carolina. We organized a Baptist church at the close of the meeting with, I believe, 7 members. I left Enterprise in the late fall of 1895 and went over to Walla Walla, Washington, and stayed on Dr. N.G. Blaylock's ranch and worked some for him through the week and preached over in Oregon at New Hope Baptist Church just below Milton, Oregon. I also supplied at Weston, Helix, and Adams a few times. Supplied means preached and, filled in and helped for them. These small towns each had a small Baptist church. Adams Church called me as their pastor, all but one voting for me. The one voting against me said she would not have me, that she did not want a young man running around with their girls, and that she would lock up the church house. When the clerk of the church wrote me, he told me this, so I did not accept the call. This woman that objected to me had been received from the Methodists on Methodist baptism. Her husband was the main support of the church, and I knew it would be useless for me to accept the call. So somebody there that had Methodist baptism and probably wouldn't be able to break through that. In 1896, I went to the Dallas, Oregon went to Dallas, Oregon to attend the North Pacific Coast Convention that had just been organized by churches opposed to the reception of alien immersion. Here I met some members from Staten, Oregon, 19 miles east of Salem. They wanted me to visit them as they were without a pastor. I went down there that winter, and they called me as a pastor for half-time. I did mission work and pastored Waldo Hills Church, 9 miles north of Staten. We had a successful year, 1897, and I will tell you about it in our next chapter. So you're going to hear that off and on, that he pastored one place quarter time and another place quarter time, or half-time and half-time. Different places he would go. He would pastor one church one Sunday a month. He would be there and he would pastor another one, or at least help them out. People would ask me, they'd say, well, where was his membership? What was he, what was this all about? What was he doing? Well, no doubt he had his membership somewhere, but as he would do this, he would help out where he could, because there just wasn't enough preachers. All right. In 1897, while pastoring Staten Church for halftime, I preached at Cox Schoolhouse near Nehama, 12 miles east of Staten. I had Elder G.W. Pertherer, who is missionary of the Western Association, to help in a meeting at Cox Schoolhouse. This was a wonderful meeting. It rained every day, but would let up about time to go to church. People got so they would say, let us get ready to go to church. The rain will quit, and it did. There were 6 or 8 professions. Staten Church extended an arm up there to receive the members. 2 of these had been baptized by a Campbellite preacher who was there when they told their experiences. I commented on the danger of being baptized without a change of heart. The Campbellite preacher got up and said, did you say we don't believe in a change of heart? I said, I don't know what you believe. He said, I want to say we do. I said, I hope you do, and we'll preach it in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. He said, I will, and sat down. Brother Pertherer laughed about me getting that Campbellite to promise to preach the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. At this time, we had the Western Baptist Association of about 8 churches, and Brother Pertherer was their missionary, a grand old man. Never had I a better friend or brother, and he was loved by all true Christians that knew him. He got so hard of hearing that he quit preaching before he went home to be with the Lord. I was called as pastor at Dallas Baptist Church in Polk County for half-time, and when my year was up at Staten, I went to Dallas. I was preaching one Sunday a month for a little country church called Riverside near Albany. Old Brother Valentine Caldwell, his wife, and 12 children about made up this church. I bought a bicycle and traveled on it to my appointments. So he traveled by bicycle. The year at Dallas, I baptized about 15 into the church. I advocate direct or gospel missions, as it was called then, and took subscriptions for the Missionary Helper, published by Sister Kerr of Decatur, Georgia, a gospel mission paper. All right, so just notice how he says some of that. Baptized about 15 into the church. And direct or gospel missions. While here, the missionary secretary of the North Pacific Coast Convention came to see me. He wanted me to quit my way of opposing the convention. He offered to buy me, then threatened to starve me off the field, said he had rather pay my way back east than for me to go in my independent way opposed to the convention, Southern Baptist Convention. I listened to his arguments and threats. Then I said, brother, the Lord led me to this field, and when he wants me to leave, he'll let me know and provide the means for me to go. He said, you can't expect my help, and you will just starve. Well, I have not starved yet, and where is he now? The Lord only knows. While I was here in Dallas, I held a meeting for a country church for 10 days and baptized 4. I never took a collection. Some opposed it and said it was the deacon's business to raise the money to pay the preacher. So you guys, just keep that in mind. One old deacon said to me, I'm going to raise some money for you. But all I got for the meeting was 50 cents. And an old Methodist lady gave me that. In a few months, that church house burned down and the church never met again. It was thought that a man who held fire insurance of $600 burned it to get his money. After pastoring the Dallas church for 1 year, I went over into Nestucca Valley in Tillamook County. Here were 2 little churches, Hebo Baptist Church meeting in Neafong Schoolhouse and Union Baptist Church meeting in Union Schoolhouse. They were only 3 or 4 miles apart, one on one side of the Nestucca River, the other on the other side. What's funny about this is most of you don't know these areas, but being from Oregon, Dallas and Staten and Tillamook, this is a long time ago before cities were built up in Oregon, and he makes it sound like these were pretty, well, number one, there aren't any churches in those places anymore, and they never were very big, and both Staten and Dallas are just tiny little places. They're just not, and Tillamook as well. But you know Tillamook because of the cheese, right? Tillamook cheese or ice cream. That's the same Tillamook. I talked to Sister Wendy about traveling to Tillamook for youth rallies one time. That's a fun discussion. They were only about 3 or 4 miles apart, one on the one side of the Nestucca River, the other on the other. In 1898, there were no bridges, and it was difficult to cross the river, especially in the wintertime. The two churches called me as their pastor for 1/4 time each. In the course of time, I got them to unite, and they became the Cloverdale Missionary Baptist Church. Here I preached in schoolhouses about the county, and I held a week's meeting in Fairview Schoolhouse, 4 miles east of Tillamook. I stopped in the home of Mrs. Amanda Donaldson. They were Southern Methodists, old settlers from Georgia. Here I got acquainted with their daughter, Miss May Donaldson, who was a school teacher. We were married September 6th, 1899. She was a good Christian girl, had been converted in a Methodist camp meeting held near their home in teaching school in Beaver, Oregon. She boarded with a strong Carmelite lady who got her to be immersed by a Carmelite preacher. She had never heard a Baptist preacher, but she believed the Bible taught immersion for baptism. When she heard me preach a sermon on baptism one night in their schoolhouse, as I walked home with her, she said if she ever got the chance, she would join a Baptist church. I said, if you join a true Baptist church, you will have to be immersed again. She said, I would want to be. If I was baptized for the wrong purpose, I would want to be baptized for the right purpose. So in a few months after we were married, she joined the Cloverdale Baptist Church and was baptized in the beautiful Nestucca River to show forth the death, burial, and resurrection of her Savior by the hands of her husband, the pastor of the Cloverdale Missionary Baptist Church. So that's pretty cool. You hear that stuff. She was Methodist and baptized by a Carmelite preacher and realized after hearing him preach that she really needed to be rebaptized, or at least he told her she would have to be if she was going to be a Baptist. Chapter 4. While here in Cloverdale, Oregon, I had 2 debates. When I first came there, an old man by the name of Butts sent me a challenge for a debate. He was a spiritualist lecturer and had been a Methodist preacher for some years. I saw he did not know what Baptists believed by his proposition for me to affirm. I changed my proposition as to what I was to affirm and sent it back to him. He was to affirm spiritualism is a true philosophy, therefore a true religion. We held 4 days and nights of 2 hours each day, 10 to 12, 2 hours at night, 7:30 to 9:30, speaking 30 minutes each alternately. I think if the Lord ever blessed me in a meeting, he did in this debate. There were 3 or 4 who claimed conversion from the debate. It was in Hebo Schoolhouse, which was packed with many spiritualists and infidels. There were 2 old spiritualist mediums who would come and sit right in front of me and look up at me and work their faces trying to hypnotize or hinder me. And once when I was pleading the grace of God through the shed blood of Jesus Christ as the only hope for a lost soul, I noticed these 2 old women had forgotten to work their faces, and I saw one of them wipe a tear from her eye. I felt the power of God was overcoming the devil. It's cool stuff to hear, isn't it? The other debate was in Oratown Schoolhouse, south of the Little Nestucca Bay, some 10 miles from Cloverdale. An old Carmelite by the name of Bales challenged me for a debate. We held 4 nights. He was very rough and abusive. I considered I won a great victory by my kindness to the old man in the face of his abuse. After I married, I took up a homestead on Big Nestucca River, 4 miles above Beaver Post Office, which was my post office for many years. I preached at Cloverdale once a month and in schoolhouses all over the country. I organized a church in Brown Schoolhouse just above where we lived. I preached for them for a few years. It was named New Hope Church. Deacon Moon sold out and moved to California, and some others moved away. The church disbanded, but she had done a good work. I baptized some converts into her that I expect to meet in glory. I preached in Tillamook City. One time we organized a little church of 6 members there, but after a short time, some of them moved away. They wanted letters, so the church met and disbanded, granting each other letters. While I lived on my homestead and worked, paying my own salary, I preached in 32 schoolhouses of the county. I believe there were 40 schoolhouses then in the county, and I preached in all but 8 of them. There are not so many now since roads and autos, and there are consolidations. I preached in communities where grown young people had never heard a Baptist preach and seldom heard anyone. In 1901, I was called as pastor of Goldendale Baptist Church in Washington State. I went up there for a year, but came back to my homestead in Tillamook County and was called again as pastor of Cloverdale. In 1911, I was called as pastor of Condon, Oregon Baptist Church. I moved up there for a year. That church had only 14 members, and all of them women, except one man who lived off in the country and was seldom there. They paid me $25 a month for half-time, 2 Sundays a month. They had a hard time paying that. I gave the other half-time to mission work. I had a mission down in Rock Creek, north of Condon, some 12 or 15 miles. Here I had the experience of my life. There were 3 or 4 good Baptists who lived there, and they were anxious that we get the associated missionary to help us hold a meeting. We arranged with them to come and help us. I had met him, but was not acquainted with his ability to holding a meeting. When he came, we arranged to preach night about. I was to preach the first night. I preached on John 3:16. There was a good crowd and good interest. The next night, he preached and took the same text and contradicted some of the things I had preached. The next night, I preached from What Doth It Profit a Man If He Gain the Whole World and Lose His Own Soul? My subject, the value of a soul. The next night, he took the same text. I had and did as he had done before. The meeting blew up. The Baptist told us to quit, so we did. I never tried to hold a meeting with him again. While in Condon, we lived rather hard. We had 3 children, and we did not suffer from hunger, but at times we did not know where the next meal was coming from. During this time, the secretary of the Oregon Baptist Convention came to see us. He wanted to help us. He said, I needed the help and the church needed it. If I would just sign up and work with the convention, he told me what all they would do for me and said, think it over. I'm stopping down here in the hotel tonight and will come up in the morning and get your answer. We thought it over and talked it over with my wife and prayed over it that night. Next morning, I told him I would not accept his offer. He seemed to feel sorry for me. So again, constantly trying to get him to get Southern Baptist Convention help and endorse it, but he wouldn't do it. So this is in 2 parts. I'm just going to go finish part 1. We're almost finished with it here. Double check for time's sake. Again, I know it can be. Yeah, we're not too far away here. Okay. Chapter 5. While here in Condon in 1911, John R. Blaylock was born, and I actually knew that guy. When I was a young preacher in Oregon, there was, what was that property, Wendy? Sheridan. There was a property in a little place out in the middle of the country called Sheridan. It was the Sheridan Baptist Church. And it was a tiny little church house. John Blaylock was Reuben or R.Y. Blaylock's son. And by this time, he was fairly old. I'm going to guess he was probably in his 80s, maybe. And he had gifted or had somehow he had given the responsibility and privilege to the church at Salem, where Brother Dolan was for years, the property in Sheridan. And this property was a tiny old, looked like an old schoolhouse, but it was an old church house building, just like one you would see on Little House on the Prairie. And when they had to meet out there one time a month, and so the Salem church would meet out there one time a month, and from time to time they would call me as a young preacher to come and preach there, getting spirit bumps talking about it because it's part of my history. You know, I'm telling you my history, and my history is kind of connected to this history, and it's from faith to faith, you know. And as a young preacher, I would go out to this little schoolhouse building, and it was rather unique. And let me describe it. just like the old schoolhouses or church houses you would see. Just literally, it looked just like the church house and schoolhouse on the Little House on the Prairie episodes, except it had 2 doors. Not 1 door, 2 doors. Does anybody know why it had 2 doors? Huh? Why? One was for the men and one was for the women. Back in those days, the men went in 1 door and the women went in another door. And it had an old potbelly stove in the back to keep it warm. And men and women sat segregated. The men sat on one, they would come in on the 1 door and they would sit on the one side, and women would come in the other door and they would sit on the other side. Now, creepy old building, a lot of history, and that's what if these walls could talk, you know. But what was even creepier was surrounding this old building was a graveyard. And all of the members, former members of that church, were buried all around that church building. And when Salem was given the responsibility and rights to the building, they were also granted the rights to bury their members there. And so I always thought that was kind of cool that, you know, I mean, who knows when resurrection day comes, who's coming up out of those graves. You know, nobody that you knew, but you're going to know them pretty quick, you know. And so, but pretty neat. So John Blaylock, he would be there when I was back in those days when I would preach out there. He was out there as well. And I remember that he had, I think it might have been a granddaughter that was kind of mentally handicapped, and he took care of her. But so I knew John Blaylock, which was his son. While here in Condon in 1911, John R. Blaylock was born. We gave him to the Lord and prayed God to make a missionary of him. He never knew until after he surrendered to go to China as a missionary. And so my kids didn't know that we also prayed this for them. That maybe no, I'm just kidding. We never did, but we should have, apparently. In 1912, we moved back to Beaver, Oregon on our homestead. I lived here and worked on my homestead, preaching on Sundays at different places. I pastored a little church 7 miles northwest of Sheridan called Rock Creek. Also in Sheridan, an old Union church 4 miles south of Sheridan. I supplied these little churches at different times. Old Union Church is the only one still in existence today, and that Sheridan Church building is literally out in the middle of the country. It's in the middle of nowhere. Farmers would come from all over the county and go, you know, on their wagons and horses and go to church there. Those days I went on horseback or afoot up the Nestucca River and across a mountain trail to the head of Willamina Creek and down to Buck Hollow Schoolhouse, then across a bridge to Rock Creek and down it to Rock Creek Schoolhouse where they held church. It was about 35 miles across a steep mountain from my place to Rock Creek. I made many hard trips across this rugged mountain trail. That's 35 miles across this rugged mountain trail. Sometimes wading the big Nestucca River. One time coming home, I had to wade it, and I took cramps in my legs, so I could hardly walk. I rubbed my limbs with some turpentine I had in my hand grip and managed to get down to D. Jones's, about 2 miles, where I borrowed a saddle horse to ride home, some 12 miles farther. I think that was the last time I made the 35 miles on foot. So, kind of tells you the times were not easy, you know. I went out there Saturday and preached over Sunday and came back Monday. I seldom received more than $2 or $3 a trip. What moved me to make these trips? The money I got? I could have stayed at home and worked on the county roads and made twice that much. There was a deeper motive that moved me than any earthly gain. Sometimes I would be away. I'm going to stop here, but I also want to say something here about that. I've thought about this. You know, what would move him to travel 35 miles on foot? And what caused him to do this when he could have made more money elsewhere? And there was something more. And I say this because this is where I think the shame comes about in our generation for people. And it's really unfortunate that we're having the problem with the shortage of preachers that we're having and pastors, because it's either God is not calling men or men don't want to be called. And it's not like he did either. When he was being called, he ran from it. But the thing is that God was calling him, and he knew. And the Apostle Paul says that a man desires the office of a bishop, desireth a good work. Well, you're not going to get that desire on your own. God's going to give it to you, but if that's a desire that you have, you shouldn't fight it and you shouldn't resist it because it's a good work. I sometimes feel like maybe I should apologize to some degree about maybe how I come across, because sometimes, Brother Jason and I talked about this, I'm trying to use the word disappointed more often than I use the word discouraged. I've had people that say that they don't believe that Christians should ever be discouraged, And, over time, I think maybe I haven't been as much discouraged about things as much as I've been disappointed, because I've thought an awful lot about it. The apology that I'm talking about is only in the sense of maybe how sometimes I would deliver my frustrations. And why the frustrations? Why I was trying and starting to text Brother Jason a text the other day. Because this year at camp, they're not getting very many people, and it's the signs of the times. It's just getting harder. We haven't had a VBS here for how many years now? I can't get people to attend our seminary classes. I've said before, I've told probably our deacons at least, but I've said this before, if we have a end of school year revival meeting, it disappoints me when we only get a small group of people from our church, but yet people will come clear from Meridian and clear from Coachella, clear from Oregon to be here. And we've got people that live here that know 3, 4, 5 months ahead and still can't or don't care to make. I'm just saying this is something that can be very disappointing. Let's call it that. And Brother Jason's trying to get this camp thing going, and he's doing it by himself now that Brother Anthony's gone. And he's having a hard time. People, he says, I'm seeing only 5 or 4 people registered from Waterford for camp. Please tell me that's a mistake. And please try to endorse the camp when you get back to services. I didn't say a word. I couldn't say anything to him. I don't know what to say to him. Because I'm going to be honest with you, it's getting to the point where I can endorse things, but I don't think anything's going to come of it anymore. And I was trying to text to him, and I asked him, is this disappointing or discouraging? And he says, well, I'm so busy, I haven't really had the time to really think about it yet, but it's very frustrating to say the least. Yes, signs of the times, he gets it. I know it. We know it. And I started to text, and I had this long text typed out to him, and I wanted to try to explain to him, because they're looking for a pastor and they've had pastors leave. I wanted for him somehow to know that when they find a pastor this next time, if they find one, I wanted him to know that here's the deal about, let's call it the right kind of pastor. The right kind of pastor has a different kind of motivation than the wrong kind of pastor. You don't want the wrong kind of pastor. I could have replaced the right kind of wrong kind with good pastor or not good pastor. The right kind of pastor is a good pastor. The wrong kind of pastor is a bad pastor. You don't want that kind, right? That causes a lot of problems. But if you find the right kind of pastor, if you can find a good pastor in this day and age, you're going to find out that the right kind of pastor isn't in it for the money. And the right kind of pastor isn't even in it for the comments that he might get at the back. Because I have people that come back there that have been excluded from a Missionary Baptist church for many years, that every time they're here, they say, another good message, Brother Hall. And the only thing I can think of is, if it was so good, then why don't you do something about it? Why don't you do it if it's that good? I don't want to hear good job. I don't need what a good pastor is looking for. A good pastor is looking to see that the efforts are worth it. That's been my biggest frustration as pastor over the years, disappointments. When you work as hard as you do, and there are things I might say that I'm probably going to be hesitant to say because there have been a lot of disappointments. But I'll say some of it. The loss of people here. You work really hard to teach and train people to grow a church, and then when you take a big hit, like COVID hits, and we lose a whole bunch of people, you start to say, what's it worth? We're going backwards. And you start to wonder, what's it worth to do this? And then, for me, this is what I do. I get off the ground, I put my foot back in the stirrup, I'm using language I don't even know much about, and I reach my leg back over and get back on the saddle. And this time I ride that horse faster than I did the time before. And I go at it harder, and then another blow. And I get knocked off my horse. And I sit on the ground and I wonder, why am I doing this? What's it worth? Is this worth it? Because I'm not in it for the money. See? I could be making more money, but I'm not here for the money. I'm not, wherever I'm at, I'm not there for the money. I'm there to do the Lord's work. It's a different motivation, and that's what Blaylock is saying. I could have stayed home and made more money, but I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing it for a different reason that I can hardly explain to you. It's something that reaches beyond the ordinary understanding, and it's beyond this world. I can't even I don't typically sit around and even think about it. I just do it because I know what God expects, and somehow I want to do what he expects. And my greatest ambition has always been to do the Lord's work and to have a good, strong, sound church that loved the Lord and really wanted to serve the Lord with all their hearts. And I had all this typed up because I want for him to know that they need to understand if they can find a good pastor, this might be the last one they're ever going to find. I'm telling you, if they find one and they can get a guy in there, it might be the last one they ever find again because it's gotten that bad over the last few years. And if they can find a good one, they better do everything they can, not to pay him more, not to give him compliments at the back door. But if he's a good pastor, his ambition is beyond money and it's beyond accolades. It's something more than that. He wants to do God's will and he needs to see the results. Otherwise, he might feel like there might be a better place to go find results. And that's the reality of it. And I texted that whole thing out, and then by the time I got to the end of it, I was getting ready to send it to him, and I deleted it. I didn't send it to him. I figured, you know what, I'll let God say that to him. I think I might have worried that he might have felt like that was me trying to say why I left, And to be honest, that was part of it. You get to a point where you feel like you've run out of steam or opportunity in that place, and you got to understand that there needs to be something more. Now, that's from my perspective. But what about your perspective? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing any of this? Is there a reason? Think about it. Why do we do VBSs? Well, I've heard it before. Well, we haven't been getting any real response from the community that we're in. Well, if we're not getting any response in this community where we're in, then maybe we should go to a different community. That's an option, but nobody wants to do that because that requires a lot of change that nobody likes and fear and whatever else. But if we're not getting any response here, and that's why we're just not going to serve the Lord anymore, then we should find a community where we can move our church, where we can get that kind of response. Otherwise, we've got to look at it this way. Jesus walked many miles out of the way for one woman who was a Samaritan woman because he needs go by this way because there was one woman he needed to meet with. And with the Lord, it always ends up being one at a time. If we win one for our efforts, it's worth doing it. And anything that we're doing is worth doing if the Lord will bless it. And we got to believe that he will bless it. And we need to get out. And I'll tell you, COVID really, I don't want to say COVID was the direct impact or the direct reason for it, but I will say since COVID, the dynamic of this church has changed because we don't go out and talk to people out here anymore. We don't have we haven't had. That just means we just got to go do it, I guess. We've gotten generally lazy. We stopped having Sunday school for a while there, and then we started back up. But when you stop doing something like that, you take the risk of people not coming back for Sunday school. But we've just gotten to the point where we've become a little bit complacent since COVID, and I think that was part of the plot that Satan had, and those that were behind it. They weren't able to stop us completely, but they've kind of burned us up a little bit, and so I want you to think about why you're doing what you're doing, and is it worth it? And what is your ambition? And what are your goals in serving the Lord? What's it worth? What is your life about? I'll tell you, the Bible teaches that Christ is not part of our life. He is our life. And let me say this. That means this church is not part of our life. This church is our primary purpose in this life. Amen or no? Seriously, this church is the primary purpose for your life. Your life is not about getting rich. Your life is not about getting more comfortable. Your life is not about enjoying yourself. Your life is not about kicking back in a chair somewhere. Your life is not about touring the world. Your life is not about whatever your ambitions are, your hobbies, your entertainment. Your life is not about those things. Your whole purpose in life is what Jesus placed here in this church. And if it isn't, you're going to find out very soon, probably sooner than later, that everything you worked and spent all your time in this life on was worthless because you will not take it with you when you go. But everything you did here for Christ through this church, you take with you to glory. I read what this man did, and this man, the Bible says that they that win many souls, they're going to shine as the stars in the firmament. Brother Blaylock is going to shine like the stars in the firmament. That's his purpose. You say, well, he's a preacher. No, it doesn't matter. You have a purpose. God has called every one of us to a purpose through this church. This church is your life, and it is your number one purpose in life, or should be. And that's the way we should always approach everything we do. And it's unfortunate that we maybe don't sometimes, or maybe that we've forgotten that, or we've gotten lazy or complacent, or whatever word you want to place on it. I'm trying to not let disappointment drag me down. I'm trying to climb up past it and not let it be such a brutal blow when it happens, whatever it is, because the devil always finds a way. He always finds a way to hit you where you're not expecting it. And, I just can't afford that. By the grace of God, I say this: I am who I am because of the grace of God, and by the grace of God, I never intend to quit serving the Lord. Never. Because this is in my heart of hearts. It is in the deepest reaches of my heart. This is the only thing that my life has ever found any value in, not just in me, but in any person I've ever looked at. I've never seen anything more valuable than what we have as God's people. So this church is absolutely important. It is the most important thing you have in your life. And I'm not just saying that. It is. And I want you to look around, because we're talking about Stockton Church, Valley Home Church, Tully Road Church, Valley Springs Church, 4, 5, 6 people until there's nothing left. This church is not there yet. How did they get there? They got there because they started to be complacent, People stopped caring, they stopped working, they got lazy, and then it's just a matter of time from there. And I'm just not willing to let that happen. All right? So we can even take a little lesson in history here and think about it. And I want you to think about and pray about these things, because whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. That was right there in our history lesson, huh? And so keep these things in mind. All right, anybody else have any other thoughts on any of this history or anything like that? All right, well, let's go ahead and stand. You know what I love? I think about this history is I love the Lord's church. And many of our forefathers have fought and bled and sweat and walked 35 miles over mountainous terrain for the Lord's church and Lord's churches. We are working or adding to somebody else's labor. All right, we're entering into another man's labors, and those people sacrificed for us to have what we have. Far be it from us to let them down and to not leave something for our kids and our grandkids. So, if there's nothing else, let's dismiss in prayer. Please remember this week to pray for our camp. And it's kind of a weird scenario. Brother Rick and I are the only pastors. So we're each preaching 2 services this time. And there aren't very many adults. It's going to be a lot of kids. So it's going to maybe be a little overwhelmed. So we'll see how it goes. So pray for those of us that are going, and pray that souls might be won. Okay? Anybody else have any other word or announcement? Okay, Brother Bush will be doing the lesson on Wednesday, so keep that in mind. And don't forget Saturday is fellowship at Brother David, Sister Jessica's house. And I don't know if you can hear it in his voice. He's pretty excited about it. He's trying to really make it worth coming to. So definitely consider going, put it on your calendar. Everybody's welcome. They'd love it if they could have as many as possible. So, all right. So that's Saturday, 3 o'clock, right? All right. Nothing else? Let's dismiss. Brother Brock, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you dismiss us?